afternoon. As way of introduction, my name is Fitzgerald. I grew up in and went to Verona. Undergrad I did at UW-Madison, which is where I met Freddie, Latrell, Sharif. Latrell lived with my very good friend from high school. And Latrell still, to this day, still calls me at least once a month to check in, make sure I'm still alive. I did the sports law program at Marquette after undergrad, and then from there went on to my first job in NCAA compliance was at Illinois Springfield, which is a Division II institution. When I was there, Illinois Springfield was transitioning from NAIA to NCAA Division II. I was there for 2 years, and then I really am more of a big city kind of person, so I had to leave Springfield and I moved to Miami, Florida. I worked at Barry University, which is a Division II school, for 4 years, and then most recently I was at Manhattan College, which is a Division I school in the Bronx, New York. Sorry. So I have worked a total of 9.5 years in college athletics. I resigned in December for various reasons. Oh, sorry, I'm just talking, sorry. You can, yeah, go ahead, yeah. Okay, here we go. So I resigned in December for various reasons. A big part of that is I realized I just really don't like following rules. So I understand when you hear NCAA compliance, some of you may cringe. It took me 9 years to cringe, and I finally had enough. But it's really important because you have to meet these requirements to get your student athletes into college if that's where they want to go. I'm also a big supporter of Brandon Jennings going overseas and avoiding the NCAA. So if that's a route that one of your student athletes is able to take, then that's great as well. Let's see here. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. So the purpose of today is for me to help you help your student athletes and to provide you with baseline knowledge. I don't know everyone's level of knowledge for NCAA rules, so I'm just going to talk very foundational. The idea is that you help your student athletes get to where they need to be, and then if there are outside circumstances that may require a waiver, something like that, hopefully then their compliance directors or at the people at the colleges or universities where they might be going, then they can kind of take that over. But really, so how many people here are high school coaches? How many? Okay. And how many are college? Okay. So high school, I really geared my presentation towards high school coaches. College coaches, though, this is helpful when you're recruiting. It's also really helpful just as knowledge. I'm sure as most of you have experienced, education as well as college athletics as a whole is really understaffed, underfunded, under-resourced. So the more that you know to help your student athletes get eligible, the more likely that they will become eligible. And really, the best coach I've ever worked with is Steve Masiello at Manhattan College, who he may get a bad rep for various reasons. He, by far, is the most prepared coach I've ever worked with, and he also knew all of the NCAA rules inside and out. And he and I were able to work together and really do a lot of cool things from a waiver standpoint because he had that baseline knowledge and he was able to help me. At Manhattan College, I was one compliance person for 400 athletes and 19 sports. And without his knowledge, I wouldn't have been able to get the waivers that we did for his athletes. Okay, yes. Yep, we're good there. A little bit of my basketball background as well. I shouldn't say obviously, I did not play basketball. You can throw me any sport I can play any sport except for basketball. I don't know what it is, but it's my absolute love. My dad played at UW-Platteville, and then both of my parents went to Madison West, so they've had season basketball tickets before I was even born. I feel like I grew up with Tracy Webster, Rashard Griffith, Michael Finley. That's kind of my background. And then while at Barry University, I was on the Division II Women's Basketball Selection Committee, which was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. I did that for 3 years there. And then my first year at Manhattan College, I traveled with the team because our director of basketball ops started late into the season. And I did the financial, all the financial stuff on the road, and got yelled at by Masiello a lot for talking after a loss. So that, let's see. Great, okay, so we're gonna start with a few NCAA requirements. The NCAA loves to make everything really complicated. So if you look at this, talking to your high school student athletes and just looking at all these requirements, so this is this is everything that your student athletes can take to meet those 16 core course requirements. So we're gonna talk about core courses, GPA, ACT, SAT scores. I'm going to start first with Division I. I have experience at Division I and Division II. I do not have Division III experience. However, all Division III institutions set their own academic requirements. Okay, so first, 16 core courses. Here's the list of all of the things that your student athletes can take to reach those. Freddie, if you go to the next slide. Or we can make it really simple, which the NCAA does not like to do, and just say 4 English, 4 math, 4 social science courses, 4 science courses, 1 per year. So that's the very basic first way that your student athletes can be eligible for Division I basketball or any sport. This does cover all sports as well. So after reaching the 16 core course requirement, a minimum GPA of a 2.3 in order to be eligible for Division I basketball. And what's really important to note here, this is not an overall GPA, this is a core course GPA. So any other courses that your student athletes may take, phys ed, music, while incredibly important for the overall well-being of the student athlete, they won't count towards the GPA requirement. So you really need to stress and monitor as coaches, as guidance counselors, as anyone involved with student athletes, it has to be that core course GPA. By the time your student athletes are starting their senior year in high school, 10 of those 16 core courses need to be complete, and 7 of them need to be in English, math, or natural or physical science. So you may hear the 10-7 rule often. This is strictly for Division I. Division II does not have this requirement. So 10 out of the 16 core courses need to be complete by the start of senior year. Okay. And also, I do have plenty of time for questions at the end, but you're welcome to ask any questions as I'm talking. Okay. And then, so Division II used to just have a baseline GPA and a baseline test score. NCAA Division I was always a sliding scale. Division II is a sliding scale as well. So if your student athletes have a really high GPA, they can afford to have a lower test score. And then, I guess in contrast, if they have a low GPA, a high test score will really help. So in order to be eligible at the Division I level, their GPA that they have has to correspond then with the test score on that sliding scale. One good thing, the student athletes can take the ACT or SAT as many times as they want. There is no limit from an NCAA standpoint. And also, every single time a student athlete sends in their test score to the NCAA will pick the best score from every subject to give that student athlete the highest combined score possible. So it's really important every time your student athletes do take a SAT or ACT, there's a code that they can enter to have that test score sent to the NCAA. It's 9999. Every single time it should go there. If they get a really, really poor score, it's not going to hurt them. It's just the highest score from every subject every single time they take the test. I mean, sometimes it's the difference between a few points to be eligible or not. So don't ever have your students feel concerned about sending in a bad test score. So this is very small. I more so just wanted to show you that this is available. This is the sliding scale. The way you'll read it is GPA, the core course GPA is on one column, SAT score is on another, and ACT score. It's also in the packet. Again, it's really hard to read. But I also gave you, so Sharif helped me, he handed out that half sheet of paper. That half sheet of paper has all free NCAA resources on it. There's an NCAA publications website. Everything you can download for free. For the most part, you can even order things for free. So if you wanted to order, for example, the guide for the college-bound student athlete, it's 32 pages. You could order a whole box of that to give to your guidance counselors, and that's all free. So everything I gave you, all of the resources are free. And you can also find the sliding scale on there as well. Division II is similar, a little more lenient on academic requirements. This is the breakdown of the 16 core courses that student athletes must take throughout high school. Here, rather than the 2.3 GPA, there's a 2.2 minimum requirement, and then there's also a sliding scale for Division II as well. Again, it's a little bit more lenient. And like I said before, Division III institutions set their own standards. I'm not familiar with those. They vary from institution to institution. A big part of that is because Division III schools don't offer athletic scholarships. However, 75% of student athletes at the D3 level do get some sort of merit-based or need-based aid. Okay. So prep school, that really, what I just talked about was for student athletes who are coming straight from high school going to college. For purposes of Division I, you are allowed one gap, or a year gap year in between high school graduation and when you start college. A lot of times during that gap year, student athletes will go to a year of prep school. What's really important for me to express to all of you is that there are very few academic benefits to 1 year of prep school. Student athletes who graduate from high school, even if they do go to a year of prep school, are still evaluated under the same freshman initial eligibility standards. The difference here is that if you do go to prep school, you can take one more course after high school graduation. That's it, just one. But the student athlete can retake the ACT or SAT as many times as they want. Okay, so what can you do now to help your student athletes be successful? How many people are familiar with the NCAA Eligibility Center? Is that it? Really, that's it? Okay, this is the single most important part of getting your student athletes eligible. So the NCAA Eligibility Center, a lot of people also refer to it as the clearinghouse, which that name changed like 15 years ago, and it drives me crazy when coaches say that still. It's just www.eligibilitycenter.org. If your student athletes want to play Division I or Division II, they need to be cleared by the Eligibility Center before they're eligible for competition. A lot of times, athletic departments, athletic directors, admissions counselors at colleges or universities won't, I shouldn't say won't. I'll backtrack a little. Every school I've worked at is really underfunded, under-resourced, understaffed. If a student athlete hasn't even started the process for enrolling with the NCAA Eligibility Center, then the staff member is going to move on to the next kid. Just because we can't sit there and figure out if someone's going to be eligible and do all the work prior. So this is the single most important step for your student athletes. I would recommend having them all registered with the Eligibility Center by the time they're sophomores in high school. Right now, the fee for it is $80. However, if your student athletes qualify for a waiver for the SAT or ACT, they'll also qualify for a waiver through the NCAA Eligibility Center. Ultimately, there's a way to do everything. There's always waivers, there's always ways to get around things. We do not want the fact that there's an $80 fee to be a way to dissuade anyone from registering and ultimately getting eligible. Okay, actually, so do we have any high school counselors or anyone who also functions as a counselor? Okay, so one really important thing to do as well is to talk to your high school counselors. Every single high school has something that's called a 48H. That is the list of, and this is the responsibility of the counselors at your high school. Every single high school counselor is supposed to take all courses that are offered at your high school, and then they send in any sort of documentation that the NCAA requires to make sure that that is an approved core course. So I'll give you an example. I had a track student athlete this fall. He came to Manhattan College as a walk-on student athlete for track. He had really, really good grades. I was checking his eligibility. It came back that he was a non-qualifier. And he was shocked, his coach was shocked. He was accepted into college, there were no problems. I went back and I looked at his transcripts, everything looked fine. His high school guidance counselor hadn't updated their 48H, so none of his, I shouldn't say none. A handful of his courses didn't count as core courses for NCAA purposes because his high school didn't do that. It was a headache and it caused a lot of panic, but ultimately we had to get their high school guidance counselor to update that, and then I just asked for a recertification. Yes?
Can you address the online course virtual school?
Yep.
Independent of the high school? How does the MCA look at that?
So that is the responsibility of whatever institution is offering that course to make sure that it is approved. So there's probably, I would say, anywhere from 5 to 10 requirements. There needs to be a syllabus. The class needs to meet on a regular basis. It needs to be over the course of however many weeks. Ultimately, it's up to either the student athlete, the instructor, or the institution to prove that it's a legitimate class. The NCAA is going to ultimately, it's going to default into thinking that it's not legitimate and not a core course. So it will be up to, so if a high school offers an online class as part of their graduation requirements, or not necessarily requirements, but if their students are allowed to take online courses, it's up to the high school to prove to the NCAA that that should count as a core course. And that, again, will come down to the guidance counselor that has to do that. I'm less familiar with something that is not associated with the high school. Rarely will that go towards the core course requirement. Does that help? Okay. Let's see. Oh yes, the core courses. Okay. Yep. So sophomore year of high school, make sure your student athletes are registered with the Eligibility Center. The components to that are transcripts. There will be an amateurism questionnaire, which is 90% of the time the student athletes fill it out, request final amateurism, and that's it. There are times when there will be follow-up questions. For the most part, this is not something to be too concerned with. I see it the most with international student athletes who may have a different club athletic background, but that's another component I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so grade 11 right now is very crucial for any of your student athletes who just finished their junior year of high school. So the NCAA can do a lot of work for you. All of your student athletes who are juniors in high school should be sending in their most up-to-date transcripts right now. The reason for that is any student athlete who is domestic, the NCAA will do an initial eligibility read on their transcripts up to junior year of high school. They will tell you how many core courses the student athlete has. They will tell you if they've met the 10-7 rule. They will give you a preliminary GPA as well. So that way you can look at that GPA and see what the student athlete needs to get from an ACT or SAT standpoint. This, again, a lot of student athletes, I think, are concerned about sending in things early because they don't want that preliminary non-qualifier or preliminary redshirt designation. As a coach, college coaches, or as someone at a college or a university, looking at that and knowing that they're a junior, it doesn't dissuade any sort of level of recruiting. You should be a preliminary non-qualifier your junior year because you still have a whole year left of core courses to take. However, the NCAA will tell you exactly where you are from a timeline standpoint. So very quickly, then grade 12, graduate. Again, send in any ACT or SAT scores and make sure the student athletes send in their official and final transcripts. There needs to be proof of graduation. And finally, student athletes, their senior year is when they request final amateurism. So in order to be eligible, they need to be final certified from an academic standpoint as well as from an amateur standpoint. So I'm gonna just go through one question. This question was sent to me via the Facebook group, and it actually, there was a lot of conversation after that, so I wanted to use that same scenario and tweak it a little bit. Okay, so what if your student athletes might not meet the NCAA initial requirements? This is the part I think a lot of people deal with is they have someone, yep, and go ahead. They have a student athlete who has D1 potential, who is very talented, but is really borderline from an academic standpoint. Ultimately, we want to be in the best position to be able to guide them on the right track and show them that there are a lot of possibilities and there are a lot of ways to either get eligible or to ultimately get to where they want to be by going a few other routes. So here's the academic profile for the student athlete: 2.3 GPA, 15 ACT. Let's just talk about what routes the student athlete can take. So let's assume that this student athlete just ended their junior year of high school, will be a senior in the fall. Yep, go ahead. The first thing that we want to make sure they do is send in all transcripts right away. If they get a designation within the next couple weeks that says they are short one core course going into their senior year of high school, they can take a course over the summer. They don't need to reach that 10 core course mark until the start of their senior year of high school. So there's a lot of work they can do over the summer as well. They can also then sign up to take the ACT or SAT again, because they will get a core course designation and they'll get a GPA designation. That can be done right now. Yep, so on the sliding scale, a 2.3 GPA corresponds with a 75 composite ACT. So that's just something, again, you're gonna wanna check the sliding scale to see what they need to reach the minimum requirements. My advice in this situation is that the student athlete could still be a Division I qualifier. They should get an early academic status as soon as possible so they know what they have to do their senior year to be successful. So let's take that same academic profile, which is a 15 ACT, a 2.3 GPA, and now pretend that it's the middle of their senior year. There's 2 signing periods for basketball. There's the early signing period in November. There's the regular signing period in April. We want that student athlete to be deemed a qualifier at least by April so that they have the opportunity to sign with the school. There's 4 potential outcomes here. We just talked about continuing on the path towards Division I. There's the option of Division II, which is a little bit more lenient. So there the sliding scale is more lenient and the GPA is more lenient. Another benefit of Division II, they offer partial qualifier status, which means that a student athlete can still receive a full athletic scholarship, can still practice, can still enroll in school, be a full student athlete as far as support services. They just can't compete that first year. A big problem when a student athlete gets a non-qualifier designation is that universities, colleges, coaches don't want to waste a scholarship on a student athlete who can't compete. A lot of D2 schools package their scholarships so they can still get aid that first year, can still practice, but just won't be able to compete. So that's always an option as well. Okay. The benefits of prep school. So remember, for Division I, you graduate high school, you have 1 year gap year, then your clock starts. That 5-year clock, you have, once you enroll in college, you have 5 years to complete 4 seasons of eligibility. A benefit of prep school, you can continue to take the ACT or SAT, you can take 1 more core course, and your eligibility timeline won't start at this point. Benefits of a junior college, your academic profile starts completely fresh in junior college, so anything that you did in high school won't carry over. If the student athlete receives an associate's degree, they can be immediately eligible at Division I or Division II. There are transferable GPA requirements that vary a bit. The downfall to junior college is that once you enroll in college, your clock starts. So if you enroll in college, you then have 5 years to complete the 4 seasons of eligibility. The difference there is that at Division II, if you go part-time, that doesn't count. Division II counts full-time semesters, not years enrolled. At Division II, you have 10 full-time semesters to complete 4 seasons of eligibility. So that's an option for a student athlete who may not be ready from an academic standpoint to start full-time somewhere. Okay, I'm gonna finish. This up here, the resources, is the same thing that Sharif passed out to all of you. Again, those are all free publications. There's a few 2-page pamphlets. I would recommend passing this all along to your guidance counselors. Finally, any questions? Yes?
My school is a new high school, so we only have up to juniors right now. And we just started our program this 2 years ago. Our guidance counselor and our athletic director have gotten together to try to make sure that we're part of the NCAA Eligibility Center to fulfill the requirements. Now, if we have students who are now juniors, does the NCAA go back and look at everything that they've done, even though we were not considered NCAA eligible yet?
They will. Yep. So what they'll do is, if your athletic director, principal, guidance counselors are sending in all of the requirements needed to meet those core courses, the NCAA will go back and look at what the student athlete took their freshman year, sophomore year, and as long as it's documented and if it's on that 48H, then your student athletes will be fine. Yep.
So I was told by someone that, well, since if we're not already part of the NCAA eligibility center, that those kids would not be qualified.
No, so you don't necessarily as a high school have to join the eligibility center. You need to make sure that all of the courses at your high school are documented through the eligibility center and show up on that 48H. The idea is to not punish the students for a new school, for a school closing, anything like that. If your guidance counselors can show that the classes they took are core course eligible, then that will count for your student athletes. Yep. Okay. Anything more? Yes?
You know how the NCAA decides what makes a course, like, obviously they have those certain standards, but to me, I don't know, we have business classes where I teach at, and those classes are rigorous. Why wouldn't the NCAA consider those courses to be a part of that? They should. So I have less experience from the standpoint of what courses count. There's various, there are various requirements they have to meet as far as sending in syllabus, any sort of timeline for assignments that are due. So a business course, for example, could fall into the category of a social science. You're allowed certain floater courses
And the NCAA will take those courses and they'll put them into different classifications, which is why when I've evaluated a few transcripts, I've seen like foreign languages, those count. So I would look first to make sure they hit all their English classes, math classes, and then I would take those floater courses, and that's where I would then look at the student athlete's transcript. I would match it up with the 48H from the high school, and then I would just pick and make sure that they hit all 16. That's something that's more specific to guidance counselors, but if it is a rigorous course, it should be on there, and if for whatever reason they don't accept it, then keep fighting. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Good? All right, I'm good. Thank you.